Hi friends, it's your boy Cranberry Enthusiast, and welcome to the exciting 6th episode of this series in which we are going through the book of Daniel and kind of going through it and finding all the little quirks and wild things and really wild and deep and inspiring things as well, and just whatever we can find. And it's been quite a wild journey so far. This is probably the most, like, I want to say, like, insightful expedition through the book of Daniel that I've ever been a part of before. So and of course we're at chapter 6 today, which it's kind of interesting here. Today is kind of the last chapter of Daniel that is in a very specific narrative form and in the vein of what we've been following so far, which this will make sense more, especially next episode when we get into the vision chapters, as I sometimes call them. But anyway, we're in Daniel chapter 6 today. Happy June if you're watching this in June, because this video is probably coming out in June, and I don't know. Anyway, so let's begin chapter 6, and if you are at all familiar with Daniel and things about Daniel, then you probably will recognize a lot of stuff in this chapter. So let's get right started before I keep babbling on and on and on. Let's go to Babylon, or not Babylon, because remember from last chapter, Babylon was invaded by the Persians and the Medes. And so, yeah, anyway, let's go. It pleased Darius, which if you remember, Darius is called Darius the Mede. He received the kingdom at about age 62, end of last chapter. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom to be in charge of the whole kingdom, and over them 3 commissioners, of whom Daniel was one, so that these satraps would be accountable to them, and that the king would not suffer loss. So, just an educated guess here, the satraps seem like, are they like accountants? Here, let me do a quick search on what does satrap meaning. Oh yeah, so it says a provincial governor in the ancient Persian Empire. I have a feeling I looked up that word before in a previous episode, and I just totally forgotten about it. So, which, to be fair, it's not a word that I use very often. This is, in fact, I don't use it really unless I'm reading it here in Daniel or something. But so, satrap, a provincial governor in the ancient Persian. So governors basically, and so people probably one of their main things is, you know, getting taxes from the people and the conquered people and everything. Anyway, so that the king would not suffer loss. So yeah, so then this Daniel began distinguishing himself among the commissioners and satraps because he possessed an extraordinary spirit, and the king intended to appoint him over the entire kingdom. So new king, same Daniel, and Darius is like kind of Nebuchadnezzar before him, not really so much Belshazzar, but Darius is like, seems like he has a growing respect for Daniel. So very cool. Darius is, side note, and we'll get into more things, but Darius is low-key one of my favorite Old Testament kings, I would say, especially of the non-Israel Judah monarchies. But anyway, let's continue. Then the commissioners and satraps began trying to find a grounds of accusation against Daniel regarding government affairs, but they could find no grounds of accusation or evidence of corruption because he was trustworthy, and no negligence or corruption was to be found in him. So, shout out that. And also, yeah, seems like there's a huge case of jealousy here, which, I mean, kind of, I guess, would understand. Imagine, like, if you're a governor for a Persian Empire, and there's this guy who's, you probably look down on him because he's like, oh, he's a foreigner, at least in that particular time period, and maybe even today in places, which is awful. But then it's like, and I love the VeggieTales song so much. Oh no, what we gonna do? The king likes Daniel more than me and you. And so, yeah, so the commissioners and satraps here, so they're like, oh, the king likes Daniel more than us, like Daniel's gonna be greatly honored, you know, what can we do to, like, bring him down, so to speak, which is probably not really the best way of going about things. Like, really, no matter what it is, even if it's just I'd say even like, you know, a tiny, like, sports rivalry or something, like, sure, friendly competition is cool, but if it generally is consuming your mind, it's like, okay, what can I do to like bring this guy down? It's like it's probably not a very good place to be. And actually, one of the best things that you can do is even if you don't feel like it, to do things of love to that person. Um, Shout out C.S. Lewis. Mere Christianity, very much yes. Anyway, let's let's and shout out Daniel. That Daniel's is free of corruption. They found no ground of accusation. He was trustworthy, just a general good guy. Or you probably see now kind of why I really like. I would hope that Daniel and I would vibe a lot and stuff, because he seems like a genuinely very good guy and a humble guy too. I know that the passage kind of like is almost like bragging about him by just stating facts that he was trustworthy and they couldn't find any corruption about him. Not that Daniel, of course, had never sinned, and actually we're going to, in some later chapters, we're going to be covering that type of topic and stuff, but yeah, but it just, it's, I think one of the main messages here is, as in a lot of chapters of Daniel, it's be like Daniel, and just, the more you know symbol, but be like Daniel, and if I had the technological skill, well, if I had the time and technological skill, I think I might be able to with my current equipment, but I would love to have a thing, be like Daniel, but it's the more you know meme. Anyway, you might not know what that means, but if anyone does have that, feel free to drop a comment below, and if you want to make something like that, that would be absolutely fabulous. But anyway, let's see here, where were we? Oh yeah, so then these men said, we will not find any ground of accusation against this Daniel. I love how now this chapter is calling it this Daniel. Even the narrator is doing it for this chapter, which, new king, new government, kind of makes sense. So, against this Daniel, unless we find it against him regarding the law of his God. So, they've noticed that, Daniel is kind of close with God, and he, probably doesn't really make it a secret. I'm sure he isn't, necessarily like inviting the satraps over for Bible study, namely because, well, the Bible, it's a long story. Obviously, the book of Daniel would not be written while Daniel is still, like, doing things. And anyway, I'm stating the obvious again. I am so sorry. Alright, okay. So then these commissioners and satraps came by agreement to the king, a conspiracy, and spoke to him as follows. King Darius, live forever. Isn't it kind of funny? I mean, it makes sense. You go to a monarch, hey, wish you excellent health, I hope that you live forever, Yeah, like, almost a way of respect, flattery type thing. Can you imagine? Like, imagine, like, if you could be, say, someone who's really, like in poor health, or suffering from a horrible disease, but yet they cannot die. Which, side note, I am someone of the opinion that, jumping all the way back to Genesis in the Garden of Eden, God driving out Adam and Eve, if that's even the right terminology for it, but it genuinely was like a mercy, because if my understanding is correct, if they had remained there and eaten from the tree of life while in their, corrupted state, then literally there would be maybe not necessarily no redemption, but it would be much harder, because now it's like, no one is dying here. But I mean, even just imagining, everyone you love, like, they never die, they just get really sick and frail, but like they are, constantly experiencing whatever horrible pain or whatever, even to the point of their withering away to like a skeleton. And anyway, it's kind of, it's a rabbit trail that sometimes I jump down too much. But anyway, I'm all over the place today. But let's continue here. So they're talking to King Darius, and then they say, all the commissioners of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors have consulted together that the king should establish a statute, and enforce an injunction that anyone who offers you a prayer to any god or person besides you, O king, for 30 days shall be thrown into the lion's den. So they're coming to the king and being like, hey, talked it over with a bunch of people, and we think you're such a great guy. You should establish this law and enforce it, that anyone who prays to any god or anyone, anything, except you, King Darius, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Which, you know, if you've heard of Daniel, you've probably heard of Daniel in the lion's den. Anyway, foreshadowing here. But yeah, shout out, it was the fiery furnace in chapter 3. It's the lion's den here in chapter 4. Sorry, chapter 6. Yeah. So anyway, so they say that, then they continue, now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it will not be changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked. So that was kind of a cultural, customary thing. It was, you know, if the king signed something into law, then that was how it was. Shout out, this is the book of Esther as well. Anyway. So thereupon, King Darius signed the document, that is, the injunction. So I wonder what entirely the king was like. Which, man, can you imagine? It seemed like he wasn't quite thinking that entirely through. I mean, you know, unless, like, he's just so used to people, like, kind of, like, worshiping him or whatever, or viewing him so highly that he's like, yeah, it won't matter. You know, sure, you know, y'all thinks that highly of me? You know, how can I refuse? I mean, I am a pretty important guy or whatever. And so anyway, so he signs the document, probably uses his signet ring, which I think might be referenced later. Anyway, so he signs it. Now, you might be able to see where this is going. Now, when Daniel learned that the document was signed, so he must have heard about it, of course, he entered his house, and in his roof chamber he had his windows open toward Jerusalem. And he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and offering praise before his God, just as he had been doing previously. So Daniel hears about it, and granted, you know, when you know, that you are serving, as the book of Daniel often says, you know, the God of heaven, who, you know, jump back to past chapters, you know, he revealed visions to Daniel and his friends. He, you know, miraculously kept Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from being burnt up in the fiery furnace. You know, like, this God of heaven is the real deal. And so, you know, sure, King Darius is like the most powerful man in the world right now in terms of, you know, like empire might and whatnot, but, you know, as we saw in chapter 4, you know, God can just like that, you know, take away any person's, you know, kingdom, so to speak. And fortunately, he does so typically, at least it seems, if not in every case, for redemption, greater redemption, like with Nebuchadnezzar. It was Nebuchadnezzar's undoing that ultimately God used to bring about his redemption, so it seems. At least the details is pointing that way. In my mind, so anyway, so Daniel is like not doing anything. So anyway, I wonder what's going to happen next. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel offering a prayer and imploring favor before his God. How about that? Then they approached and spoke before the king about the king's injunction. Did you not sign an injunction that any person who offers a prayer to any god or person besides you, O king, for 30 days is to be thrown into the lion's den? The king replied, the statement is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked. So, yeah, the king's, wonder what was going through the king's mind. It's like, yeah, we did that. Yeah, what's up? Then they responded and spoke before the king. Daniel, who was one of the exiles from Judah, you almost hear their snobbery in that. He's one of the exiles from Judah. He's not one of us. Pays no attention to you, O king, or to the injunction which you signed, but keeps offering his prayer 3 times a day. So like, ta-da! This Daniel, he's not quite the great guy that you thought he was, Mr. King Darius, sir. He's paid no attention, and he's So what do you think of him now? What do you think of us now? You like us? Oh, hooray! What would be the opposite of the "oh no, what we gonna do"? The King Likes Daniel song. I don't know. Anyway, so how does the king respond here, though? Then, as soon as the king heard this statement, he was deeply distressed, and set his mind on rescuing Daniel, and until sunset he kept exerting himself to save him. So the king put on his thinking cap and was like, because again, as the king's saying, it's tradition here, if the king were to, like, revoke it, there would probably be, like, grounds for, like, an uprising, and it would probably be very much controversial, shall we say. So anyway, then these men came by agreement to the king, so the conspiracy, and said to the king, "Recognize, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or statute which the king establishes may be changed." So they're like, yeah, this is how it is. Like, so, like, the lions are hungry. So let's continue here. Then the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and thrown into the lion's den. Yikes. So I've been to the zoo a few times, and one of the last times, it was like, obviously there was like a fence and stuff, but it was so much so that if someone wanted to, they could jump over and throw themselves into like the enclosure with the lions. It was like that, like it was safe, but it was still, you could do it fairly easily before someone could stop you, and that kind of like freaked me out, because like, I love lions, and like, obviously, like, I love Chronicles of Narnia too, which is one reason too, but lions are just beautiful as animals and stuff, and I just, they're giant cats though, and as someone who has had many cats, cats like to play with things, and I can safely assure you that if basically any of the cats that I've had, if they were the size of lions, they would probably try to kill me. So, not out of spite or anything like that, but just because it's their nature. They're just playful like that. They see something smaller than them that's moving around, they want to, Oh, but anyway. So yeah. Let's continue. The king said to Daniel, "Your God, whom you continually serve, will himself rescue you." And it almost seems like, I wonder, like, or what the king kind of meant by that. Was he like saying, like, "Hey, take courage, Daniel. I'm sure that your God will save you," or is he saying that mainly to calm himself, or is he almost posing it? Because sometimes things are written where they're posed like a question, like the king. Or maybe the king was saying, "Hey, I hope that your God will himself rescue you, because I can't." Like, the king couldn't think of anything apparently, and not that maybe there was anything that he could have thought of anyway. So, and a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring. There's the ring, and with the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing would be changed regarding Daniel. So it's like, this is official king business. Like, like, sure, there are probably some people who, saw that the king didn't really want Daniel to die, and so maybe they would have been tempted to, go back to the lion's den and get Daniel out as soon as most people had left, if Daniel wasn't attacked by the lions by then, and then, like, to try to find favor with the king. But with this, it's like, the king officially signed as a nobles thing. Shout out to, I forgot how much, so we got the whole thing about, like, with the tree imagery, like, back in chapter 4, and now we have, like, rings of power, like, sealing Daniel's face, like, I never realized how much, like, the book of Daniel was inspired by Tolkien. Tolkien. Like, for some reason I want to say Tolkien, because I now know how to properly spell his last name, but no. I would be, I wouldn't surprise me if Tolkien really liked the book of Daniel. Anyway, so let's continue on here. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. Which, side note, I too typically spend the night fasting. Unless I wake up hungry, and I usually have like a granola bar or something just in case, so I don't have to get out of bed and go all the way downstairs to the kitchen for something to eat. But this, I think, implies more that he was awake all night and not eating, and probably through like the evening, like he probably didn't have dinner or anything too. So, and no entertainment was brought before him, no YouTube or video games or social media for King Darius tonight. No entertainment was brought before him, and his sleep fled from him, which is understandable. I mean, I don't know about you. Not really a situation like this where I had someone who I really liked, who I knew was like being fed to lions, but I've had nights where it's, a lot of, you're concerned about somebody or something, which unfortunately I can't think of too many specific examples, but yeah, it's just, sleep will definitely flee from you in certain circumstances. Then the king got up at dawn, and at the break of day, and went in a hurry to the lion's den. And when he had come near the den to Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. The king began speaking and said to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you continually serve, been able to rescue you from the lions? The critical question. This is the climax of the story. What will happen next? And also, what was I going to say? Oh, and I might actually bring that up in a little bit. So, no, I'll bring it up now. Okay. Say, and you probably already know what happens, so that let's just hypothesize for a second that Daniel somehow did survive being thrown into the lion's den. I wonder, would that be something like today where it's like, someone who's sent to be executed, if the method of execution fails, they can't be executed again with that particular thing. Like, I don't know if they can be tried again. I don't know all the particular details, but like someone with like the electric chair, if someone gets the electric chair but they don't die, then they can't just flip the switch again. Like, it's illegal to do that. So I wonder if something like that is there too, which, and going back to earlier, so they were talking about, she'll be thrown into the lion's den, and presumably, torn apart and eaten by the lions. And so, the lions, showed up between the lions. I don't know if you ever have heard of that. It's an old TV show that used to be on PBS Kids, about a group of lions that own or run a library. Oh, it's been so long since I saw anything about Between the Lions. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting distracted by lions. So been able to rescue you from the so anyway, so suffice to say, if Daniel is alive, he probably, it's not that, oh, you have to stay in the lion's den until they eat you. Like, it's, being thrown in and left there overnight is probably like the sentence. And so anyway, so again, the climax. The king asks that. Then Daniel spoke to the king. O king, live forever. Daniel also using the customary thing, live forever. Daniel continues, my God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, since I was found innocent before him. And also toward you, O king, I have committed no crime. How about that? And if you were to believe the VeggieTales version, they had pizza instead. Which I know it's not likely. I kind of hope that happened somehow. Somehow they had ancient pizza back then, which probably did. I remember, like, 2,000 years ago, they may well have had ice cream or some sort of ice cream type of, like, thing. So, pizza might have been, or some, like, ancient pizza might have been some sort of thing. So, anyway, then the king was very glad and gave orders for Daniel to be lifted up out of the den. So Daniel was lifted up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. It's kind of like fiery furnace, kind of again, which is interesting too. Like, given the question of like, what is more quote unquote impressive? Someone being cast into the fiery furnace and coming out unscorched, unharmed, not even smelling of smoke, or someone being cast into the lion's den and coming out unharmed, unscratched completely. Which both are crazy impressive, and it's kind of hard to compare one to the other because they are entirely different. But at the same time, like, one is like controlling nature itself, the properties of fire in a sense, maybe, whereas the other is like keeping like animals who like are obviously not human, but they still, an animal can think more than say a fire can think. So it's like, that's an interesting thing. So then the king then gave orders, and they brought those men who had maliciously accused Daniel, and they threw them, their children, and their wives into the lion's den. And they had not reached the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Wow. So there is probably the darkest verse of this chapter. Which, I mean, you got to remember, for one, that these guys literally suffered the fate that they wanted Daniel to experience for like no good reason. Like they were jealous of him, and they lusted for the power and prestige that Daniel had because he was a genuine, trustworthy, good guy. And so, I mean, as much as it's like my mind, like, there's a part of me that's like, yeah, wouldn't it just been nicer for, the king to just put these guys in prison for life? Or, like, that's, like, did they have to? I don't know. And again, though, they, like, without a second thought, were willing to throw Daniel to the lions. So, and I wonder how many there were, because, it doesn't say. It's more than one, so it must have been two or more, because that's typically how math works. And shout out the king, probably, being awake all night and thinking about it. Darius was probably crazy tired. I wondered if he was hallucinating Daniel's voice at first. But he probably realized, like the other wise men kind of tricked me into this thing, because seems like they're jealous of Daniel. I mean, the way that they're all acting giddy, like, hey, Daniel's gonna be eaten by lions. And then, so yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like, for them to suffer the fate that they wanted to give to Daniel, like, I don't, again, just the idea of anyone being torn apart by lions, even if it's entirely justified, sometimes is, like, hard for me to, like, really process and stuff. But that, and then also the other thing here too, their children. Those are the children of these guys who were maliciously accusing Daniel, and also their wives were all thrown into the lion's den, which kind of, if my understanding is correct, in the ancient world, it's kind of a symbolic thing of, say, someone being entirely wiped out, like someone's entire family being wiped out, like their whole lineage. And it's also, so, yeah, which kind of flies in the face of, there are different parts in the Bible where God specifically is like, fathers shall not be put to death for their children's sins, nor children put to death for their father's sins. So it kind of definitely seems like, well, and again, the key thing to mention here is that this, judgment on the people who are accusing Daniel, God is not decreeing it. Darius is doing it, because, and, culturally, that's kind of what you do. If, you want someone to be, really, like, destroyed, it's like, destroy their whole family, basically. Destroy their whole lineage, like, wipe them off from history, basically. And, so yeah, which, and also shout out, it says children here, too. For all we know, also, too, the wives and children may have been in on it. And by children, I mean, they could have been older, children, too, because naturally the people who are high up, if it's anything like today, typically the people with most power are typically of, like, an older age in the generation, so to speak. I don't think, for instance, any governor of the United States is, under 40 years old. And so their children may well have been, involved in some way, but even if they're not, again, it's kind of, the ancient world was really, really bloody and violent and awful in a lot of ways, and injustice and stuff happened all the time. So it's, maybe not absolutely fantastic, like, I really, me, or you probably know me if you're watching this, and if you don't, then hi, we can comment below, we can have a conversation. But I love happy endings, and I love redemption stories, and good winning and victoriousness and stuff. But as I've also gotten older, I've grown to appreciate even darker stuff as well, and like this obviously is fairly dark, and I don't know exactly, I mean, if God says, that, oh yeah, you know, the Darius did exactly what he should have done. Like that was how that was, like, you know, with even with the guy's children and everything being like torn apart by lions, you know, if God says that it had to be that way or something, then it had to be that way. God, of course, gets the final word in my book. And so yeah. So, and they had not even reached, that's a wild imagery too. They had not even reached the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones, which sounds incredibly painful, but they probably were not alive for very long after that, because if you, I mean, even if we don't take it literally that every single bone in their body was crushed, but that they were just, you know, mauled to death, that sure, it's awful for a little bit, but then you kind of die, and then you're not in that physical pain. So yeah. So let's continue on to see what happens here. Then Darius the king wrote to all the peoples, nations, and populations of all languages who were living in all the land. So kind of taking a page from Nebuchadnezzar's book almost. Or maybe it was just a customary thing when something great happens in an ancient king's life. You know. Anyway, so so this is what he wrote. May your peace be great. I issue a decree that in all the realm of my kingdom people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and enduring forever, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed, and his dominion will be forever. He rescues, saves, and performs signs and miracles in heaven and on earth. He who has also rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel, shout out the narrator, like using the same terminology again as like the other things, the satraps and whatnot. So this Daniel enjoyed success in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian, which I think Cyrus came after Darius, if I remember right. So yeah, so Daniel, so, you know, and shout out, Darius is kind of like, he kind of, in a sense, seemed to come to his senses here, and is like, yeah, the God of Daniel is the true God. You know, and I'm sure, you know, the story about, hey, did you hear about, you know, that the guy who's like high up in, like, I mean, imagine today, someone high up in politics, was like sentenced for like a crime that they kind of didn't really commit, something really fishy, and like they were sentenced to death, say by the electric chair, but then they actually survived. You know, that news would, well, and of course today with social media, it would, you know, shoot around super fast, but even back then, you know, it would have been, people would have talked about it a lot, I'm sure. And so shout out people, especially when they hear reference from it, from a message from the king. So yeah, and that does it for chapter 6. Shout out everything here. I didn't think of it at the beginning, and it might be cool if next time I go through the Book of Daniel to have like a kill count for how many people die in the course of the Book of Daniel. Which of course we wouldn't be able to do exactly, because obviously it doesn't say, you know, it doesn't even say how many men have maliciously accused Daniel in this chapter and whatnot. But anyway, hopefully the camera is still recording, and yeah, thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned for next time. We're halfway through the Book of Daniel now. Basically just finished chapter 6, and there's 12 chapters, and so yeah, we'll be beginning some chapter 7 and the wildness of the rest of the Book of Daniel. So thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you all again next month, if not sooner. Have a wonderful day.